Speaking of animation, let's go ahead and move on to the next category as we talk about best animated movie. Dave's favorite, of course,
Oh
talking
yeah, let's
cartoons.
go. My
Let's
favorite. No.
go
Um
Cartoons. Let's
cartoons.
talk about
What do you
cartoons.
got about
I
for animated film?
I think this year for animated film is very top heavy. I don't think it's a great year overall, but I think the top movies are quite good. So my nominees, first Memoir of a Snail, which is heart wrenching. This is definitely not, I make the joke, animation for kids, blah, blah, blah. That's not
This is an
Memoir of a
R-rated movie,
Snail.
if I'm
It
not
is,
mistaken.
yeah, there's nudity, there's suicide there. It is both one of the funniest and one of the saddest movies of the year. And I highly recommend, if you can get a hold of it, watching Memoir of a Snail. Second nominee is The Wild Robot. Yeah, JD talked about it already. It's great. Whatever. Yeah. Wild Robot. One of the best of the year, obviously. Transformers 1. Big surprise this year. JD referenced this earlier.
Mm-hmm.
I saw the trailer and I was like, this is gonna be terrible. I don't, and
Yeah.
I grew up with Transformers, like literally had Transformers when I was a
Same.
kid.
Yep.
I'm a defender of the first Michael Bay Transformers movie. I like Bumblebee. Like, there's a lot of Transformers stuff that I like, but I wasn't like really anxious to see it. And then it got reviewed. I'm trying to remember who reviewed it on our site, and I can't remember now. But it was a very positive review, and it's like, okay, I'll check it out. And I was blown away by this movie. I think it's maybe one of the best pieces of Transformers media that's ever been made. I think it's really great.
Yeah, I agree.
Love it.
Yeah.
I love it. And then after that, we have what apparently is the awards darling, Flow, this year, which is kind of weirdly come out of nowhere in the past couple months. Everyone's like, wow, robot, maybe Inside Out 2. And all of a sudden, Flow started sweeping all these awards. And this is a movie I cannot be objective about because I own a black cat. And this black cat is in danger for like 2 hours, and it is a lot to go through. But also, like, from
a lot of stress.
From a craft perspective, like the fact that, it's just like a couple dudes making this is pretty impressive. And strangely, much like Hundreds of Beavers, creates an incredible story without any dialogue. And it's definitely worth watching. I do really enjoy that one. And then honestly, I got to be real with you, I really struggled with a fifth nominee. I really like these four, and then after that there's a big drop off. So I chose actually Piece by Piece, the Lego animated film. Mainly because I like the music. It's fine. It's basically a paint by numbers biopic, essentially. About Pharrell Williams. But you know what? It's better than a complete unknown. So I had a good time. So
you make jabs at me about low bars. Now we're doing the same thing here.
Absolutely. My winner is not Piece by Piece. So that's there right now. My winner is, this will make JD so happy, I'm sure. My winner is A Wild Robot. It's a really lovely movie. It has moments where you think it's going to end, and I would have been annoyed if it ended where I thought it was going to end, and it just kind of continues and creates a really complete arc. And you mentioned Lupita Nyong'o, who's always amazing. I don't even love the Quiet Place movie that she was in, but she's great. She's always great. Just a tremendous presence, and does more with her voice than most actors do with their entire bodies. She's lovely. And she also, I really enjoyed in the press tour coming out and talking about the animators and all the work that they do. Because she's like, I may be the face of this, but this is like 1% of what goes into this.
We actually talked about it we talked about this last week because, as I noted earlier, the migration scene was my number 2 scene of the year.
Sure.
But to your point there, Dave, one of the great aspects of that film is how it utilizes the neon lights of Roz to emote for the character, because she doesn't have a mouth. It's a robot after all. There is some facial movement, but a lot of the emoting comes through in the performance or through the animation, specifically how they use the lighting of the robot. It's really clever and intuitive how it's used in that film.
Yeah, it's great. I will say this for you, JD, and I mean it. It is not just a great animated movie. It is a great movie. It's really enjoyable, and another movie you could recommend to anybody. Just really tremendous work.
Yeah, I saw it in the theater with my wife. She was crying the whole time. Yeah, absolutely loved it. And the kids in the theater that were there too were absolutely glued to the screen.
I'm sure. Yeah.
You
can make intelligent movies for children. It's okay. You don't have to
for everyone. Yeah. The universality of not just the story, but how it was made, I think, is really quite great. Which is why it's also a nominee for me, as well as Flow, Memoir of a Snail. My two other nominees, though, are Wallace and Gromit: Vengeance Most Foul, and. Love you too, Dave.
I'm just not British enough to enjoy those movies.
Well, I agree.
I mostly just love it because I think it's a better version of Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning.
Oh, come on. Get out of here. I'm hanging up.
Like, worst Mission Impossible movie. It's the only one that's not. Oh, Dead Reckoning? Worst one by a mile.
We're not getting into this. Continue. We're already at like 2 hours. Just please.
My fifth nominee is a very small film called Look Back. It's an anime film that's available on Amazon Prime. It's only about an hour long, but I think it's a very, very tender and loving tale about the artistic process of making manga, especially given the medium that it exists, and I think is really quite clever as well.
Cool.
My winner is The Wild Robot. I'll leave it at that because I have a hunch we're going to have yet another 3-way win.
Wow.
On our hands.
See.
Yeah,
come on, JD. Come through, buddy.
Okay. Of my nominees,
he comes out and gives it to Chicken for Linda.
Yeah. No, I watched that though. I thought it was okay. It's gorgeously painted. I do love the animation, but
JD, before you get into your nominees, do you think this is a really good year for animation, or is it a little off? Because I'm no expert on this, obviously.
Off. Yeah.
Okay.
No, I mean, obviously, it'll all come down to how you view the crop overall. I do understand your point as far as how top heavy it is, and I do agree that, like most years, what we do get up at the top, I think is quite great. The difference for me is when you're getting to the depth of the crop. So, Brendan and I had a slight debate about this last week on the show, I believe it was, or a few weeks ago.
It was last week, on episode 618.
So the difference for me is that the depth here resonates with me much more than a lot of other years, even going back to last year. And last year was, I think that was last year, right? With Boy and the Heron and Spider-Verse.
That was last year.
That was last year. Boy and the Heron, Spider-Verse, Robot Dreams, Suzume, some great ones there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't love Suzume as much as Brendan does, or perhaps others. But again, that's to my point here, is that a lot of us will agree on those at the top. Perhaps to varying degrees. Obviously, we all like The Wild Robot. We all really like Flow. Last year, The Boy and the Heron and, Spider-Verse. The top films are less debated. The weight of a year it's going to come down to how you feel about the depth of it all. And obviously that's going to differ from person to person. Suzume, for example, another film that Brendan brought up last week is the Pixar film,
Turning Red, you're thinking of,
Turning
right?
Red. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Which I think is upper tier.
Much higher on that than I am. I think it's fine. I like it. I don't love that film. So again, it's just going to depend on how you feel. And I say that to say the depth for me this year, I do think is much more resonant. So I would argue that this is a richer year. You could certainly argue that The Boy and the Heron and Spider-Verse, perhaps that's even more top heavy than what you get this year.
Yeah,
but
maybe.
Even with the like my 4 and 5 last year, as much as I liked them, with Turtles and I forget Elemental, I think was maybe my 5th. Like my 4 and 5 this year, I would take 1,000 times over those two movies, and that would be Inside Out 2. I really, really loved Inside Out 2, and I think this is another film that qualified for best surprise movie for me because. I think Inside Out is the best Pixar film. I loved it. I've talked about it a lot over the years, how deeply personal that film is to me and how much it moved me. And Brendan can attest to it. He was sitting right next to me when we first watched that. back in
Oh yeah,
2015.
thought I had to call the hospital.
Yeah, so he can attest to that, to my thoughts on that film. Inside Out 2, I wasn't really looking forward to, because I think that first Inside Out is a masterpiece, and I didn't really know where this was going to go, what they were going to do. And not only do they up the ante in terms of the complexity of emotions, which makes sense given that Riley is a little bit older, and given where her life is, those emotions are going to evolve. So like bringing in something like anxiety here, I think is a really great call. And then, and this is where it gets, again, more personal for me, it is the hockey of it all. And that, like, how they get that right, I cannot overstate how right they get it. I am not kidding when I say this is one of the best hockey movies ever made. Most of the time, there are a few exceptions, but most of the time, hockey movies is.
I was gonna say, what are we comparing this to? Like,
can I get to the Mighty
Ducks? Like, the Mighty Ducks. Like, there's not a lot of greats.
There's not a lot of greats.
Yeah,
but I mean, maybe outside of Mystery Alaska.
Mystery Alaska is the closest they get, and obviously with it being an animated film, it's obviously a little cartoonish, but it's like the physics and the movement, it is all extremely authentic, and I was really engrossed by that. And then how all of that coalesces at the end for me is something that, again, I just struggled to articulate. That moment when she's struggling with anxiety, and I guess to be a little transparent, the last month or so has been extremely anxious for me, extremely stressful, with, you know, external things happening. And so like I have been feeling the similar-ish kind of anxiety. And then I noted a moment ago that this Saturday, which by the time this episode goes live, it would have already have happened, I am going to play in this hockey tournament for the exact same reasons as what Joy, or as Riley, experiences there at the end, when she kind of lets go of anxiety and lets Joy, like she calls Joy. Like, it's not even just that anxiety lets go. Like, Riley calls for Joy, and then they go out on that skate. Emotionally, one of the more striking scenes of the year for me. And that's just my life. Like, that moment
sticks
has
the landing
been my
very well.
life.
Yeah. The movie does stick the landing.
I think it is absolutely incredible. There are certainly elements of it that keep me from loving it as much as the others, but I think on the whole, there is a great complexity to that film that I really do love, that, again, I would take over other depth pieces from previous years.
I don't mean to make light of this conversation, given how eloquent that was that you just talked about there, JD, but I love that you just spent 5 minutes on a movie that's not even going to win your award for this category.
No, but, you know, I did kind of want to talk about it, though, because, you know, you brought it up last week, and then Dave was asking the question as far as like how I feel about this category. And it is one of my favorite categories this year, because I do think it is one of the best years for animation we've seen over the last decade. The ones at the top are there for a reason. But I do want to highlight that I think why I think this is one of the best years for animation. It is kind of what we get here in terms of these last few slots. Because I think Inside Out 2 is absolutely worthy of any nomination that it may or may not get this award season. And then for all the reasons Dave talked about, and I think I mentioned it earlier as well, because it was a nominee for me for Best Surprise Movie, is Transformers 1.
A lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. Truly
blown away by that film as well. And like I love its depiction of friendship and heartache. There's an earnestness to it. It's really refreshing. The vocal performances in that film, I think, are really, really great as well. I think that's a smarter movie than it gets credit for.
Yeah,
sure.
So
I agree.
I just wanted to say, like, the only issue I have really with Inside Out 2, like, a lot of people I think were really angry about that movie, like more angry than maybe any adult should be about a cartoon, but really upset. But what I had heard is behind the scenes. This ties into your F Disney award, which is I would have given it for this. Is when the movie first was finished, the Disney executive said that the lead character came off as too gay. So they made changes to the movie to make her more heterosexual. And I was like, and I have a hard time, I will admit, I had a hard time getting that out of my mind when I was watching that movie. And I was like, screw you
That's
guys.
Fair.
This
fair.
thing.
Yeah.
Like
which
we should be better than that at this point. Like, come on.
And I like, and again,
that's a fair point.
I think I can separate the two, especially given the hockey of it all and my relationship with hockey there. But I do agree with you, and that is kind of infuriating because even though they may have removed those elements, you can absolutely see the seeds of what they were going for with Riley.
Sure.
Yeah.
So removing that kind of, it does make it a little disingenuous.
Because no adolescent has ever questioned their sexuality ever.
Yeah.
Like, what are we talking about? Come on.
And I mean, and she's what, 11, so that she was certainly going to start the process of that for sure.
Prime age for that sort of confusion for sure. Yeah,
totally.
Absolutely. I mean, I think they should commit to that if they're going to make an Inside Out 3. But it's Disney, so they're probably not.
Well, it did very well. I'm sure there's going to be. I'm sure there's going to be an Inside Out 3, regardless if they commit to that or not. Is another question.
Yes, I know. At any rate, I think that and Transformers 1, which if I'm ranking them, those are my 3 and 4, or my 4 and 5, excuse me. I still think those are really, really good animated films. I would argue. I understand that's not the case for everybody, but I would argue they're still really, really good. And then you follow those up with Memoir of a Snail, which is excellent, really fantastic. Flow has been, it just won the Golden Globe. It might even surprise at the Oscars.
Kind of coming out of nowhere. I mean, not coming out of nowhere. Everyone knew it existed, but it's making a few surprise victories that no one expected, which is kind of neat.
It is kind of neat. But yes, to all of that to say, my winner here is, of course, The Wild Robot.
9 minutes again, for Ditto.
Yeah.
All right. So it means you have to talk for negative 9 minutes when we get the best foreign language film.
That's not going to happen.
It's certainly possible. I'll just quickly say, because there's so much to love about that film as well, but like as much as I love certain scenes, I love the score obviously of it. I just love fundamentally the little gags, the symbolism they have throughout the film, or these lines of dialogue from Roz about like how she is programmed and how that the film kind of subverts that when she takes on the responsibility of being a parent, and like that discovery is something that everyone will go through when you have kids.
Sure.
That and like how the film taps into that, I think is really incredible. And I think that's why you do see a lot of parents responding to this heavily. When I took Sam to see this in the theater, and the kids were obviously having a great time, every single parent around me, undone. All of them, just completely undone. Like it really does speak to parenthood in a really deep, evocative way. So, stunning film. Absolutely love it.
Good stuff.